Hello all, welcome back to this week's Mondays with Monica, where we will have uncomfortable conversations to make ourselves all a little bit more comfortable. I am happy to be back with episode 2 of the 2022 calendar year with all of you. I hope that all of your holidays were well. If you celebrate, I am so ecstatic to be with all of you again this week. Sorry, my eye is itching me nonstop. Today's conversation is going to be about codependency and interdependency. This will be strictly for an audience of 18 and older, so I will set that setting up when I post this video so no one under the age of 18 can see it. Also, I'll put a disclaimer, I am not a therapist. I am not licensed to diagnose anyone with anything. And I'll probably say the disclaimer a few different times throughout this video. But let's jump right into it. So recently, and when I say recently, I mean like within the last 5 days, well, let me backtrack. I found a new podcast that I'm really in love with, and it's called Loving BDSM. And the last episode that I listened to was talking about what is codependency, and what does it look like, and the individuals who are the host of that podcast, they are not licensed therapists and things like that either. But it was just a conversation that really kind of piqued my interest, because it was something that I've talked about in my own personal therapy with a previous therapist about codependency, what does it looks like and stuff like that. And it was something that I had not thought about in a very long time. So let's kind of break that up a little bit. And this is kind of my point of view on codependency and all of the okay? So being dependent on something is very basic. I am dependent on having a source of income so I could pay my bills, so I can have my basic needs met: food, clothing, shelter, etc., etc. I am my son is dependent on me to make sure all his needs are met. So, and that's a healthy dependency. We all depend on some type of thing to be able to, live our lives, just to have our basic needs met, whether it's a person depending on a caretaker to meet their daily living skills, transporting them. Maybe a person can't drive, so they depend on public transportation or another person to transport them to wherever they need to go, whether it's the grocery store, things like that. So all of us, we all depend on something or someone to assist us in various ways, which is completely normal. We all have things that we are dependent on. If we're in school, we are dependent on our professors to show up, whether it's in person or virtual, show up and teach us our class because we're paying for that. We are dependent on things, which is completely healthy, completely normal. I depend on my therapist to have regularly scheduled therapy sessions to help me through whatever I need help with. My therapist depends on me to have good communication if I can't make an appointment or working on our schedules together. So we all have things. Those are just examples of, I know my hands are all wild today and I apologize. We all have things that we're dependent on, and when I was listening to this podcast, it was talking about codependency in terms of relationships, and everyone, we all have various types of relationships, whether it's romantic relationships, friendships, and things like that. I came across, there was this time in my life where I knew someone very well, and I felt like they were really codependent on me, and that they did not know who they were outside of our relationship. And I would always say, your life does not need to be about me. You need to know who you are outside of this relationship. It's okay to have your own set of friends. It's okay to do things that you like that I don't necessarily care. Like, it's good for you to do stuff outside of me. It's good for us to do stuff together, for me to do stuff alone, all of that. And I just remember always feeling like I felt like I was suffocating to an extent. And at the time when I was experiencing like this feeling, I did not know there was a word such as codependency. And whenever I had heard about the word codependency, it completely made sense. Like, that made, like, it was a light bulb that went off. Like, and codependency looks completely different for in different other relationships. I'm just speaking on what codependency felt like to me. And this is my own personal experience. Again, I can't tell you if other people in your lives or if you are codependent on anyone or any other thing. I just know that from my point of view of someone being codependent on me, it wasn't a good feeling, and I felt like I was being suffocated. I don't know if y'all ever remember, it's a kid's toy, and it's made out of like paper, and you would put your fingers in, and then you would have to like work together to get them out. I felt like that feeling when your fingers were stuck in and it wasn't good. So and I remember talking to my therapist privately saying, hey, I really just felt like this individual could not do anything without me. And I did not like that feeling. And, I was talking to my therapist, and my therapist was like, that is signs of codependency. And whenever my therapist said that, it like slapped me in the face. Like, that makes so much sense. And like, I still love and care about this person, and we are good friends now, and our relationship has changed, the dynamic of our relationship. And to see how this person has grown over the last 4 years, I absolutely love it. And I tell this person on a regular basis, like, I love the person you are. Like, you have grown, and like, you have your own things, and I'm appreciative of who you are. And it's nice to see that. In this podcast, Loving BDSM, it also talked about interdependency. And that was more so like in terms of like romantic relationships again. And I thoroughly loved this word as well, interdependency. Like, if you're in a romantic relationship with someone, married and stuff like that, like, you both understand that you would prefer not to live without the other person, or you prefer not to live life without the other person, but you could do it. You know that, if your partner cooks, makes meatballs a specific kind of way, and you love the person's meatballs, you know that if you and that person were no longer in each other's lives, you would still know how to make meatballs and still survive, or if that person went away for a week vacation not necessarily a vacation, but like on a business trip for a week, you would still be able to function and do your day-to-day life. Whereas if a person was so codependent on you, they wouldn't know how to function. Like, no, please, I can't. Like, they would get sick. And one thing that this podcast had brought up was a person who is codependent on another would be so unable to, there was like no separation between themselves and their partner. Like, what do you mean? Like, they give an example of how a person, like, they don't even know their negative feelings. Like, their negative feelings or negative emotions would come up as physical ailments, like, oh my goodness, my stomach hurts, or I have a bad headache, or they would get physically sick because they could not identify the negative emotions whenever things happened in their relationship. And it was just the unhealthy dynamic. And it reminded me of, it didn't remind me, it made me stop and think of, am I codependent on any of my relationships that I currently have? And if I am, how can I change that? Because I don't ever want to be codependent on someone or something to the point of feeling like sick. And it's only been a few days since I listened to this episode of the podcast. If you're ever looking at Loving BDSM, I think it was episode like 210 or 211 that they talk about like codependency and interdependence. And it was a really good episode. I actually want to go back and start and listen to this episode from like episode 1. I started this listening to this podcast on like episode like 208, honestly. So I want to go back and read it and listen to it from the beginning, because they talk about some really great topics so far. Disclaimer, it's called Loving BDSM, so if you're not in the kinky world or anything like that, I would not recommend you to watch it, but it's something that I do enjoy. Actually, I was in a car with my friend the other day and I was listening to it. I'm like, oh, let me change this podcast, because I'm very much into consent. So I try not to listen to things that my people in my car may not, find entertaining. Even though my friend knows that I'm like in the BDSM community and things like that, she knows, but I just kind of keep unless she asks me questions, I generally just don't sit. I don't bring that stuff up. In general, I try to be respectful. And I think that's something just in the kink world, we try to be as respectful to others in general when it comes to our kink lifestyle. If you didn't know that about me, now you know. And I'm not sorry about that. Like, I'm not. It's 2022. Skip over it. I hope you still care and love me just the same. If you don't, I understand. BDSM is not for everybody, but that's neither here nor there. BDSM is not the topic of today's conversation. Okay, let me take a sip of this tea. Here you go. This is my relaxing tea for tonight. I'm actually posting this this video really, really late on YouTube today. Today has been a very busy day. I started my first day of my new job today, so that's been very exciting to be back in the workforce full time again. So yeah, this video won't be too much longer. And yeah, so next thing I wanted to say about codependency, and there was a book mentioned in the podcast called Codependency for Dummies, which I want to take a look at as well. One thing that was actually really mentioned that I thought was really cool in the podcast was that there are people who have studied codependency. They have agreed that yes, codependency is a thing like that people have. However, not all of them can seem to agree on an official diagnosis in the DSM-5 book. And there was a books published like way back in the 80s, but then there was books that were like published more recently about codependency. And it was just something that was very interesting. It's gotten me thinking, like, am I codependent on someone? And for the most part, I don't think I am. However, I've never been diagnosed with codependency. However, I can see that in one of my relationships, how I can be like borderline codependent, and it's something that I have to work on and myself, like kind of reevaluate that. Because after I listened to the podcast and then I was evaluating my life, because that's what I do now. Like, I listen to everything. I'm like, does this apply to me? If it does apply to me, how can I adjust it? Is this something that I want to adjust? Does it need to be adjusted? Is it fine the way it is? And that's where we just kind of go from there, which is completely fine. Of course, again, I'm not a therapist or anything. I cannot diagnose you with anything that is not my field. I don't claim to be. I do give it up for mental health professionals who work in those kind of fields and who has a lot of clientele that come and like say, hey, this is my life over the last week. Let's get through this. I appreciate therapy with the utmost. I've said that time and time again. Like, therapy has been a godsend in me healing some things, and I'm working on multiple things via therapy. But yeah, as I was saying, there is one definitely aspect of one relationship in my life that I'm working on, trying to evaluate, like, am I codependent on this? And I think I am to an extent. And can I, how can I adjust this? Because I didn't like that feeling about myself. One thing, since I've turned 30, let me tell y'all, 30 slapped me in my face. So, like, 30 slapped me in my face. I really thought people, when they said that they were turning 30 and it's hitting different, I didn't believe them. I'm like, oh, 30 is just a number. Trust me, 30 ain't. 30 will slap you in the face up and down from the woody to the tootie. And you'll be seeing life completely different. And I definitely have, and I'm continuing to, like, see things differently. And I'm trying to constantly, like, better my life, because ain't no one have time for the nonsense. I ain't got time for my own nonsense. And I'm really trying to put out as much positive energy into the world, in my little piece of the world, because I need it. And I've come to appreciate that with this relationship that I'm trying to reevaluate. What do I need to reconsider? And I think that's why this episode of this podcast had really hit home for me, was because I saw myself in the podcast, like, as they were talking about things they had learned about codependency. And I'm looking forward to, like, working on that. That's something new. And honestly, like, I can't wait for Thursday when I have therapy to be like, hey, this is how I'm feeling, and this is what I think I need to do. And I'm looking forward to that. So that's all I have for today. Thank you for tuning in to episode 2 of Mondays with Monica of 2022. I'm so looking forward to talking with you all again next week about uncomfortable conversations that make us a little bit more comfortable. And I hope you tune in next week. Have a good night.